On today's episode of Locked On Canadiens, we will remind you that we have always been Mike Matheson's most ardent supporters.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into episode 1258 of Locked On Canadiens. Thanks so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. Subscribe to us wherever you get them, here on YouTube as well if you're watching this. Thanks for jumping on. Like the video, subscribe. It's the best way to support the things that you like. I am Ian Boisvert, also known as That Maybe It's Ian, and I am joined, as I always am, by the incomparable Laura Saba, also known as the Actor Stick. Laura, we have seen Montreal do something that we have not seen them do in a very long time, which is win 5 straight games, and yet feels kind of icky, doesn't it? After that one against Buffalo, what are your thoughts coming out of that game?
That was an ugly win. We have to face it. I do want to celebrate that the Canadiens have won 5th in a row, and there's so many things in this game that we do need to talk about that are fantastic. It was an ugly game from top to bottom from the beginning. I was going to make the joke that the Buffalo Sabres showed up for a fight and a Habs win broke out. The Habs made it hard.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll get into our first segment with the game. Second segment, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation at this point in the year from now until whenever it ends, whenever the wheels fall off of this wagon for the Montreal Canadiens. What matters more between now and the end of the year? Is it winning games, or is it the process in which they do so? And then we're going to try to tackle a trade deadline preview, try to figure out getting into the mind of Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton and trying to determine what we think they're going to do between now and Friday's deadline. It's just a few days away, so you'll want to stick around and make sure you know what we're thinking heading into Friday. But let's start on Monday night in Montreal, Buffalo coming to town. We talked about in our weekly preview, we talked about that game being set up as a revenge game for Buffalo because of what Jakob Dobisch did at the end of the game and Jordan Greenway not responding to it well. I thought it was funny. Jordan Greenway talked a really big game in that media press conference, and then Arber Xhekaj wanted to go with him early on in the game on Monday, and Jordan Greenway wanted nothing to do with it. It seemed like Arber Xhekaj was giving him a written invitation to do exactly the thing he wanted him to. But one thing we did talk about was Montreal was going to need to weather a storm. They were going to have to deal with the Buffalo Sabres tantrum, and they did that to the tune of 3 special teams goals in the first period. This was a tale of 2 games. Laura, first period aside, let's just look at that. How did you feel about the Canadiens' play in the first 20 minutes?
I thought they dominated. I thought it was a shellacking, it felt to me. And the Buffalo Sabres showed up for shenanigans, and the Canadiens just didn't fall for it, right? And that's what we talked about yesterday. Don't fall for it. And I think it was a masterclass. And if you look at the underlying numbers, it was not even remotely close. So it does kind of put in stark contrast with the second and third period. But we were cackling at the end of that first.
Yeah, and rightfully so. The Sabres took a parade to the penalty box, and you could have probably called 4 or 5 more penalties on Buffalo that went uncalled. There was one instance where Rasmus Dahlin, who was going to the box the entire night, throws Brendan Gallagher into Sam Montembeault after a whistle. There's a scrum, and somehow Montreal ends up shorthanded at the end of it. We're all kind of wondering why that was. And then Nick Suzuki and Mike Matheson come down the ice and have a ball don't lie moment by putting the puck into the net shorthanded and sort of making that a moot point in that one. I agree. I thought the first period was, it showed a lot of maturity from the Montreal Canadiens, that they came out in that first period. They understood the task in front of them, and they handled it perfectly. The problem is that once that buzzer hit at the end of the first period, that disappeared. And it was all Buffalo the rest of the game. They clawed their way back in, and they ended up tying it very late in the game. Rasmus Dahlin, funny enough, his fingerprints all over this one, from penalties to that tying goal. What was it about the second and third period that didn't work for the Montreal Canadiens on Monday night?
I think they really took their foot off the gas. And I think they didn't expect Buffalo to come back like that. They did not anticipate it, right? And it wasn't really a lack of maturity or lack of preparedness. I think it was a judgment call in my mind, because they just played them on Saturday. They dominated them on Saturday despite the score being close. They dominated them in the first period. So I think they kind of sat back a little bit, and it was just a judgment error, I think. And then, you know, they weren't able to recover from that. And we've seen that before with the Canadiens. Once they take their foot off the gas, a lot of times they unravel and they can't recover, or it takes them too long, right? So I think that's what they did. It was really just a bad judgment call. And then the Buffalo Sabres really took it to them.
Yeah, no, I think that's largely the story in the second thirds of this game, the second and third period. I think they played scared. I think, Buffalo came out to start the second period and looked like a much more focused team. And I don't think Montreal was ready for that. And we've seen that, right? We've seen that issue with them where they've gotten up big in the first period and they've sort of gone into the second and come back out, gone into the intermission, come back out in the second. And it seems like they just weren't anticipating the other team to react in any meaningful way. They're always going to make adjustments, always. And the Canadiens didn't make any for the remainder of that game. And they won in what is, in my opinion, a gimmick. The 3-on-3 is a gimmick. It is.
Yeah.
It's disappointing that it needed to get to that point. But at this point, 2 points are 2 points. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the second segment here. We do need to talk about the guy that we teased off the start, though, in one Mike Matheson, who was fantastic in this game. His underlying numbers won't look great because most of them didn't. Montreal was just under siege most of the night. But he was great. He had the game-winning goal, which, by the way, I love Mike Matheson. Wholly deserving of that goal because he decided to shoot it. Woof, James Reimer. Holy cow. That puck did not leave the ice. It should not have gone in. I want to make that painfully clear. However, if you're looking at the thumbnail of this video on YouTube, you already know what my thoughts are on this. And it's that this is very clearly a Magic Mike night from Mike Matheson. Am I alone in that, Laura? Is this a 5?
It's a 5. For those of you who are not watching on YouTube, we have our Mike meter out. It runs from Tragic Mike to Magic Mike, and we're at a 5 out of 5 on the Mike scale.
Yeah, and look, he was doing everything he could to try to get the Canadiens to stick around in this game. He drew the last penalty on Rasmus Dahlin, one of the most egregiously obvious pick plays of all time. Dahlin was incensed that it was called, and I kind of understand why, because they never call those. So I kind of get it. If you listen to this show long enough, you'll know my opinion on the pick play and how it's just sort of become part of everyday life in the National Hockey League. But that is what it is. The last play I want to talk about in this game was something that I thought was going to end up not being a factor because of how the game turned out. But late in the third, Montreal's getting nothing going. They just have nothing. The Bell Center's silent. There's nothing going their way. And all of a sudden, Juraj Slafkovsky gets the puck in deep. He beats Connor Clifton to the puck just by putting his shoulder into him. He knocks Connor Clifton down. He sets up Nick Suzuki in front of the net. They get a couple chances just seemingly out of nowhere because Juraj Slafkovsky did the thing that we all want him to do, which is to just be a pain below the net. And it didn't end up mattering too much in this game because Buffalo ended up tying it shortly after that. But I was thinking a leader on this team needed to step up and try to take the game over. And it was Juraj Slafkovsky, which is really a great thing to see in this game. If you're looking for something positive to take out of what was a pretty poor effort in a win for the Montreal Canadiens, that's what I'm taking away from this. Did you find that with Slafkovsky's game as well?
Yes. What I, after the Saturday game, not us, like we were kind of like, he was great. He was good. There's some people that were saying he had a terrible game, which I fully disagreed with.
Yeah.
I didn't think he had a terrible game on Saturday. But I do know that there was that criticism out there. So I was a little bit worried that he would lose his confidence, but he did not. Maybe he's not, maybe he's blocking out the media and the social media and all of that. Or maybe he didn't view his game as bad, like we did, right? Like there were a couple of moments, but for me, I thought Slavkovsky had a pretty good game. It wasn't as amazing as the previous 2 games he had.
Sure.
So it's good for me to see that he's not losing his confidence in any way, and that he's continuing to build on the upward trajectory that he's decided to embark on, which we're calling second half Slav.
Yeah, second half Slav is real. It's a real thing.
It's a thing.
2 points in this one, including an assist on the overtime winner from Mike Matheson. He also had a goal where he was just trying to put the puck across the slot and it banked in off a defenseman, which he does that a lot on the power play. He tries to slide it across the net and tries to get it over to Cole Caulfield. He's going to get a lot of those banking goals, and people are going to say, oh, it's a lucky goal from Slav. And yeah, sometimes it might be, but if you do it as much as he does, the puck's going to go in sometimes. So, he should be living large with that. Nick Suzuki,
4-point game.
Points.
4-point game.
And I believe this was his second 4-point game against the Buffalo Sabres this year. That's bonkers. The dude it has absolutely turned it on coming out of the break. Cole Caulfield hits 30. We didn't even talk about that because it seems like it happened 8 years ago. Cole Caulfield hits his 30th of the year. Lane Hudson picks up 2 more points. He's 17 back of passing Chris Chelios. If he scores 17 more points between now and the end of the season, he is the leading rookie defenseman scorer for the Montreal Canadiens. It's
in history.
These things are in history. Both that and Caulfield hitting 40 are well within range at this point.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, absolutely.
So, regardless of the effort, there's still numbers we're watching. There's still things to cheer for moving forward. And hey, the Canadiens have won their 5th straight. We can't hang our heads too much about that. All right. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, whether or not wins are all that matter at this point in the season and at this point in their rebuild, or if the process and the development of these players is still top of mind. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether I'm snacking at my desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost. They're always my go-to. I especially like the different varieties of no shell pistachios like the salt and vinegar or the chili roasted. But if you like cracking into every shell on your own, don't worry. We haven't forgotten about you. The in-shell options are always a classic favorite. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, we are back. Before we kind of get into the more philosophical discussion of wins over process at this point in the season, I find that it's important for us to do a little bit of a look at the mix and see where the Canadiens find themselves. Washington wasn't able to completely give the Canadiens a hand on Monday night as they took a big lead against Ottawa and then fell apart. They did end up beating Ottawa in a shootout, so Ottawa grabs 1 point. And Montreal's played one more game than Ottawa, but they are currently tied at 65 points. The Rangers beat the Islanders, so they are at 66 points, as are the Detroit Red Wings, who sit in the last wildcard spot. So right now, Montreal is 1 point out of a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. If I pat myself on the back any harder, I will break my spine. I have said that this team is not to be given up on just yet. That time might come. I'm not saying that this is going to go on forever. They're eventually going to lose a game again, believe that or not. But they're very well in the mix. So I guess that kind of leads into this conversation of, should we just be happy they won? Or is there still a level of learning and process that we should expect them to do as a team that's still very much on the rise? Where do you find the balance between those two things when you're watching a game like this one or the one last week against San Jose? Very similar sort of feel, right?
Where they won, but it was ugly, right?
Yes, but at what cost?
Yeah. If this was next year or the year after, every single one of these would be like a win's a win, a win's a win.
Yep.
But that would be predicated on the fact that we already have a process that we trust. I don't think we have a process that we trust. Now, I still think the Canadiens should be going for it no matter what, because playoff experience is playoff experience. I 100% think that they should be pulling out all the stops. They should be trying to win. They should be trying to stay in the mix as much as possible. Because even if they do end up missing out on the playoffs by a point or two, they will know what a playoff push is like. They will know what those sacrifices are. There are so many players on this team that have not experienced that at the NHL level.
Yep.
Or some players that have experienced that, but maybe, would want some more experience or would want to do over, et cetera, right? So I think for me, like, we still need to be worrying about the process, because there's a couple of other big realities that are coming up, and that is whether or not, and we're going to talk about the trade deadline in our next segment, but whether or not these guys get traded. There's a lot of guys that are leaving here this summer, and there's a lot of guys there's a lot of roles that will need to be replaced. I was thinking about, how Owen Beck does penalty killing in Laval, right? He is a relied upon penalty killer. Things like that, because we really need to know that the Canadiens know what they're doing with the changes that are coming up. So it's less for me about the process, and it's more about the roles and whether they have people in those roles that they trust and that we can look forward to having on this team. So yes, the process is important for the players that are going to be here for a while. But I think when we're talking about the process, I think it's more important than Laval this year. I really do.
Yeah.
So
No, it's a great point.
Yeah. So again, this is kind of a cop-out answer, being like a bit of both, but like the reality is that, 2 years from now, we're going to have a process that we do have faith in. So, the ugly wins, it's going to be like, just win. Right now, we're kind of torn because we want to see signs that the Canadiens are in for long-term contenders.
Yeah. I think the point that you made on roles is so well made, that it's, we've been harping on the penalty kill, right? And how they're going to, if they really are going to get rid of Armia and Evans and Savard at the end of this year, maybe some of them sooner, that leaves one guy on that top penalty kill unit. We haven't mentioned that player's name. Do you know who it is? It's Mike Matheson right now. The guy that everybody's trying to run out of town.
Yeah.
So I think people are very short-sighted when it comes to the role aspect of this. I know we got a lot of comments when we mentioned that Jake Evans is an elite fourth line center, and people kind of scoffed at that idea, right? That you can be elite at something that is so far down the lineup. But the reality is that Montreal is doing what they are doing now with the lineup that they have, with Jake Evans and Yoel Armia and David Savard, who I don't think is playing well for what it's worth. If they got rid of him tomorrow, I don't know that I would really be all that worried. But you need to find somebody who can replace his minutes. I thought Arbor Xhekaj was having a really great game until later in the third period, where at any time in the third period, you didn't see him. He didn't play much. So it's sort of, I think where I lean currently on this wins or process thing is that I think, and again, I'm going to do a cop-out as well. I think learning to win is part of the process, right? And it's part of the process in rebuilding these teams that a lot of teams don't figure out immediately or ever, right? The team that we are looking at right now, the Buffalo Sabres, are a team that has not figured that out. And that's, if you don't learn that, it's hard to bring young guys up in an environment where they will figure out how to win games.
Yeah.
Right. So I think winning is part of that process. Yes, sometimes you have to, in the regular season, you have to do that in 3-on-3 overtime, right? Sometimes in the regular season, you have to come back late in a game and tie it, like we saw them do a bunch on that road trip, right? I think it was the Vegas game, the Colorado game. They were down heading into the third period, and they came back and won it that way. I think that people, we look, I think Hockey Viz, like the data visualizations, have done irreparable harm to the way people watch games now, in that, we'll look at a game like, maybe not this one because we know Montreal played pretty badly in it, but, out of context, we'll look at things like, well, this has a lot of red on it, so it's bad. And it's not necessarily true. For a while in this game against Buffalo, it seemed like it was mostly score effects that were having Buffalo come back. They were down 3. That's why they were pushing so much.
Yeah.
Montreal let that get out of hand, don't get me wrong. But you do not win every game just by dominating every team you play against. Sometimes you just need to gut one out. And that's what Montreal did against Buffalo. They found a way to win, right? That's something that a lot of these rebuilding teams do not get right. I stay convinced that if the Edmonton Oilers lost that draft lottery in 2015 for Connor McDavid, I do not think they would be a team that knows how to win. Like he made that part of the mandate by being as good as he was, him and Leon, right? So you can either hope that you land two of the greatest players of all time in like drafts within a few years, or you have to learn it this way. And that's what the Canadiens are doing.
Agreed.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll leave that there. Windsor process is now behind us, and we have to look ahead. And what's immediately ahead of us is the NHL trade deadline on Friday. So we'll look into what we kind of expect or think Montreal is going to do, and we'll get into that in just a minute. All right, we are back. Before we get into the trade deadline aspect of this, Laura, this may shock you, but I pulled some numbers. I don't know if this is new to you.
I've never seen you do that before.
I was looking at Mika Blake McCurdy on Blue Sky, who always posts the, where his model puts the line to get into the playoffs. Before the games took place on Monday, that line was at 89.4 points in the Eastern Conference. So pretty low for a playoff entry. So let's say 90.
Like we have seen that in the last couple of years, fairly low.
Yeah, the last wildcard seed is usually like, how did you get here?
Yeah.
Like last year, remember it was Washington and it was them and Philly and I can't remember who, Detroit, and it seemed like nobody wanted it.
Yeah.
Right? That's why that total was so low. So let's say that 90 points gets you in clean. Montreal is now at 65 points with 21 games remaining. They'll need 25 points of the remaining 42 to get in. That's without help. That's without getting help from anybody else, which means from now until the end of the season, they can only lose 17 points. It's tough. It's going to be tough for them to make it, especially because, like I said earlier, they're going to lose games again. Believe it or not, they're not going to win forever, as fun as that would be. So yeah, just keep all that in mind as you watch this.
Yeah, we did see Detroit go on like a 10-game winning streak or whatever it is, and now look where they are.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. If you look at it, 25 points is 12 wins and a regulation loss, and that's enough between now and an overtime loss rather between now and the end of the season. If you get 13 wins, that puts you over that threshold. 13 out of the remaining 21 games. That's a lot of games to win.
Yeah.
So if they can do that, they will have earned that spot. But let's see if they can pull that off and how they'll respond to the next game that they lose, which is going to happen at some point. All right, let's take a look at the trade deadline. We already know. We know the UFAs. We know the guys who are potentially on the market.
We know the guys people are calling about.
We have a pretty good idea of what teams are interested in those players. The one thing I keep seeing is, Montreal, when they went up 3-0, it was, Kent Hughes can't trade these guys now. And then Montreal blows the rest of the game. And the thought is, well, Kent Hughes needs to move these guys now. See, like, look what happens. I don't think that any of the winning and losing at this point is modifying the way Kent Hughes sees this. I think it might lower his price if they are playing poorly and he's like, well, we just got to get this guy out of here. But if they keep winning, the prices on like Jake Evans or Yoel Armia, like he can stick on those prices harder. He's like, I don't need to get rid of these guys. We might make the playoffs this year.
There's one game between now and the trade deadline itself.
2 days off between now and the next game for the Montreal Canadiens. So
tomorrow's episode is going to be all rumor roundup.
yeah. The hat just glared at me. It's very ready to go. No, I think it's going to be a tough couple days for those players, right? We have to remember, look at this as a spectacle. Players hate this. They hate these next few days. They're going to breathe a sigh of relief Friday at 3:01 p.m. if their name hasn't been called. With that said, what do you how we talk about Marty and the way that he sets his lines? There's what we want him to do and what we know he's going to do and how they're different things a lot of the time. Let's start with what you want the Canadiens to do between now and Friday. What what's on your wish list for the trade deadline?
Okay. I'm going to get people throwing tomatoes at me.
Let's do it.
I'm sorry.
Engagement, Laura.
I want them to shop and trade Armia, Jake Evans, if possible, Dvorak, if possible, Savard, because I don't think that, if the Canadiens were going to re-sign Jake Evans, they would have, right? Especially if they leaked contract demands and they still haven't come to an agreement. They're playing chicken. Nobody's whatever you call it. Nobody's moving. Nobody's budging.
Yeah, nobody's blinking.
Nobody's blinking. That's the word. So I think that these guys are not going to be Montreal Canadiens next year, and so I do think that I want them to trade them so that they can get assets back. When I say asset, I mean any kind of, whether it is a pick, whether it is, because they're still in rebuild mode. This is still a rebuild year, right? Like next year's the year that they're supposed to be making the playoffs. So if they add more picks, they add more prospects, to me, that's just, it's money in the bank. So that's what I want them to do. And that's what I want them to do when I'm thinking with my head. With my heart, no, I want Jake Evans to stay here. Yeah. Absolutely. I want him to be a Montreal Canadian. I want him to be part of those contending years that we keep talking about. I just don't think that the Canadians, I don't think it's happening, because if it was going to, it would have happened already.
Yeah. I don't think they're re-signing in Montreal. At least not, if Jake Evans somehow stays through the trade deadline, maybe they hash things out over the next little while. But if they're trying to make a playoff push, that's why they keep them. He's not going to negotiate through that. There's no reason to. I think I'm not so much trying to say like we need to get rid of these guys right now. Like we need to trade them for assets, because at what point, yes, a second round pick for Evans, or if they can get a first for Evans and Armia combined, fine. You send them out the door. You can use that asset in a really big way.
Bye.
But if it's just like a second and some other stuff, I'm like more inclined to just keep them, especially if they go into Thursday, right, against Calgary, and they win against the Calgary Flames. Or no, sorry, it's Edmonton on Thursday, Calgary Saturday. Let's say they beat Edmonton on Thursday. They could be in a playoff spot at the trade deadline, and you're deciding to trade these guys. I think that sends the complete wrong message to that locker room. That yes, they struggled towards the the beginning of the Four Nations, and they had a hard time with it. But like they're doing the thing you wanted them to do, right? They're reaching the goal that you've kind of put in front of them. And then by trading those guys, you're kind of declaring it a failure, are you not? Like that's, to me, I really struggle with how they would handle that. I can't be a general manager. I'm way too soft. Like I would be like, no, we can't. We have to keep them all because they're playing really well. Like that's going to be a challenge for Kent Hughes to navigate. For me, I think they need to do more than anything is try to find AHL players to come and play for Laval and bolster their chance at winning a Calder Cup, right? Because if you trade Evans and you trade Armia and you trade Savard and you trade XYZ, you're going to have to take guys out of Laval to play them in Montreal. And in doing so, you've depleted Laval and you've hurt their chances.
Yeah, because they're poised for a good playoff run. And that was another thing that we had Scott Matlaw on yesterday. And I was like, we should ask him some Laval questions and post it in a later episode during the week. And I was like, no, because if Kent Hughes knows what he's doing, he's probably looking for assets in Laval. He's probably looking to trade some people to help Laval.
1,000%. So I think personally, my thought in thinking about how Kent Hughes has handled these in the past is that unless he can add somebody like a Dylan Cousins right now, like a guy, they're going to be shopping for a second line center at some point in the near future. If he can get that guy right now, he might do that. If not, I think it's going to be a quiet day for the Canadiens. If they can't do anything big, anything that really moves the needle for this year and next, they're probably not going to do anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I still think that there's stuff coming for Laval, to be honest.
Yes, yes, I completely agree with you. Aside from, I'm talking tinkering with the NHL roster, but I do think you're right. I think Laval needs another forward. Laval needs another defenseman at the very least, because they're dealing with all of these injuries. I would love to see them add to the Rocket. That would be we're talking about reinforcing these players and making them believe in the message that they're being told. Laval has had a great season. If you should be able to reward that team for playing the way that they have, you should be able to say, you guys have been great. We want to give you guys a long playoff run. Here's this AHL vet to come in and help out. Assuming that they can get that done under the veteran maximum or whatever, the vet limit that you have to have on those rosters. Any other last thoughts?
Or a minimum?
I don't remember what it is. I think it's a limit. Like, you can't have a certain number of vets. I think it's some balance. Someone will correct us in the comments, I'm sure. Anything else on the trade deadline?
When he's listening to us on the road.
Yeah, Scoot, if we said something wrong, just tell us. Anything else on the trade deadline before we move on?
No, it's gonna be a fun couple of days. We're gonna be talking about stuff, and then Kent Hughes is gonna do things in the morning that make our entire show obsolete. This is the third year of Kent Hughes. We've gotten used to it by now.
Yeah, the dude just does what he wants, and he does not care about this show, nor should he. For what it's worth, this is not me groveling. It's me saying, nah, you do you, Kent. You have to be doing what you need to do. All right, let's do our trivia and head out of here. Yesterday's question is already outdated. In 3 games this year against Buffalo, Lane Hutson has 6 points, all assists, out of date. But let's tackle that first, and then I'll kind of talk about why. Who was the last Habs rookie with at least 6 points in a season against the Sabres? Super Rain had it right. It was Michael Ryder in the 2003-04 season. He had 2 goals and 4 assists for 6 points. However, Lane Hutson went and did that thing that he's already done against Buffalo and score at 2 points a game. And he picked up 2 more assists against the Buffalo Sabres, giving him 8 points against the Sabres as a rookie, tying him with Shell Dahlin at 8 points. No relation to Rasmus from what I could find. In 85-86, the only player in Montreal Canadiens history as a rookie who scored more points against the Buffalo Sabres in their rookie season was Mats Naslund, 10 points in 82-83. Habs legend. Mats Naslund, correct. All right, today's question. Montreal just swept Buffalo in the season series. Montreal took all 4 games against the Buffalo Sabres. When was the last time the Montreal Canadiens swept Buffalo in the regular season series? If you have the answer, put it in the comments down below. Send it to us via email. You guys know how to get a hold of us. We'll shout you out on the next episode of the show. But that's going to do it today on this episode for Locked On Canadiens. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day and for subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. For your second listen, head over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey wherever you get your podcasts. We are Locked On Canadiens everywhere. You can find social media posts, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, Locked On Canadiens and all those places. LockedOnCanadiens@gmail.com. Send in your questions for our mailbag episodes on Fridays so we can talk about the things that you guys are thinking about. You can find me on Blue Sky at Maybe It's Ian. You can find Laura at The Active Stick. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.